and welcome back. How did you do finishing with the functions where we left off on EX200? Did you go through steps 9 all the way through to the end of part 1 of the assignment? Just checking in with you. Hopefully you've already completed all these functions or gave it a whirl to try to enter them on your own. I'm going to walk through them briefly with you now so that you can check your work. So let's look at 9N. Year 1 salaries. So on my sheet, I need to find salaries, which is row 11, and year 1 is column B. So I'm looking at B11. And for year 1 salaries, I'm looking at taking 14% times year 1 sales. My function starts with an equal sign. I'm looking at taking 14%, and I need to multiply that, so I'll enter in an asterisk, and I'm looking at year 1 sales. That's B4. That's the sales from year 1. I can enter that function, and my data is displayed. Now I can simply copy that data over to my other cells, and my cells are a little too far here because I'm zoomed in. And when I copy that over and I check each one of my functions for year 2, I see I'm looking at the salaries are 14% based on what we have for C4, i.e. year 2 sales. Or I'm looking at here in year 3, I'm looking at salaries are 14% of the sales of year 3. So my function is entered in accordingly for each one of those cells. Now, I'm looking at step 9P of year 1 shipping. So here I'll find shipping, which is in row 12. And that is looking at year 1, so I'm starting with B13. So when B12. When I'm looking at B12, I'm looking in to enter 3.4% times year 1 sales. My function starts with an equal sign, and I'm looking at 3.4%, an asterisk for multiplication, and I'm looking at year 1 sales. So that's B4. And then I can accept and enter in that function, and that data is displayed for me. Again, I can copy this range right on over through column I. And here for shipping, I'm looking at 3.4% times year 2 sales. And on year 3 for shipping, I'm looking at 3.4% times year 3 sales, etc., etc. And now we're looking at, I think we're on 9T, I believe it is. Or I'm sorry, supplies. So when we look at supplies, we're in row 13, starting in column B, so B13. I'm looking at taking 1.1% of what year 1 sales is. So here I will start with an equal sign because my function will always begin with an equals. I have 1.1% and an asterisk for multiplication. I'm looking at year 1 sales. I'll go ahead and enter that, and my numeric value is displayed. Again, I can use my fill handle, which is that square box, make sure I have a solid plus symbol, and I can drag across to column I. Now when I look at year 2, I'm looking at 1.1% times year 2 sales. And here in year 3, I'm looking at my function, which is 1.1% times D4, which is year 3 sales. So I continue, and my fill handle allowed that to replicate itself across the columns. Now I'm looking at web services, so 9T. If I look for web services, I see I'm in row 14. I'll start with column B, so we're at B14. Here I just need to type in 75,000. So now that I've typed in 75,000, I can go ahead and enter in that data. And now I need to find the data for year 2 web services. For year 2 web services, I'm looking at what were my web services in year 1. And then I want to take 7% and multiply 7% by the year 1 web services. So that way, that shows my increase in cost. So again, I start with a function sign, and I'm looking at what is year 1 web services, which is B14. And then I am looking at adding, and in parentheses, I have 7% increase times, what were those year 1 service fees? That's in B14. Close parentheses, and I can enter in that function. I can use my fill handle, but just to demonstrate that again for year 3 web services, I'll start my function with an equal sign, and here I'm looking at the year prior. So I'm looking at C14, the web services cost for year 2. And here I will have my plus parentheses, and I have 7%. I am multiplying that, and now I'm looking at multiplying it by C14. And I will continue that pattern across. Now when I look at year 4, again, I'm looking at what the web services were from year 3 and adding or multiplying 7% to those services. Then I have year 5, and I'm looking at the data from the previous year, which is here in E14, and I'm multiplying that by 7%. So moving along, I'm now on 9W, and I'm looking at year 1 total expenses. Year 1 total expenses is row 15. Year 1 is column 5. So I'm in column B, row 15. Now I need to use the sum function. Start my function with an equal sign. My function name is sum, and I'm looking to add the expenses. The expenses start in row 8, and they go all the way down to 14. So my range is B8 to B14. Now I'm not looking to subtract or do any multiplication here. I'm just looking at that range. So a very easy way for me to do that is our standard old sum function here. I can go ahead and enter that in. Same thing for total expenses for year 2. I'm really just looking to add the total expenses, which is rows 8 through 14. The other way is I could use my formulas tab. I can go to AutoSum and use the sum function. And here, my function is put in automatically for me. I'm going to do that for the remaining columns here for years 3 and 4 and 5, etc. And you would have the sum function down because we've done this in week 1 and week 2 labs. So now we have row 15 completed for total expenses. I think we're on 9Y now. So now we're looking at year 1 operating income. Operating income is row 17. And so year 1 we know is column B, so I'm in B17. My function here starts with an equal sign. I'm looking at year 1 gross margin minus year 1 total expenses. So I start my function with an equal sign. And again, I'm looking at year 1 gross margin. Gross margin, remember, was up here in row 6 on column B. So I'm looking at B6. I want to subtract that, and I want to subtract the year 1 total expenses. The total expenses was right here in row 15. So that's why I have B15 there. I can go ahead and accept and enter in my function. Now I'll do the same thing for year 2. Again, my function starts with an equal sign, and I'm looking at the gross margin in row 6, column C. And again, I'm going to subtract that, and I'm looking at the total expenses, which is row 15. And that's why I have C15 here. I'll go ahead and accept and enter that. And likewise, I would continue on with all of those functions. And again, you can manually enter them for practice, or you can use your fill handle. And so I have all my functions put in. And now as we're looking at the next step, which is, I think we're in double A now, year 1 income. So when I look at year 1 income tax, that is in row 18. So I'm going to start with column B. So I'm in B18. Now here's just a little simple note. If year 1 has an operating income that's less than 0, meaning I have a negative number, then the year 1 income tax would equal 0. Otherwise, year 1 income tax equals 35% times year 1 operating income. So that we need to pay attention to. Let's get started with the first one, year 1, which I'm in B18. Start my function with the equal sign, and I'm looking at my operating income. It is not less than 0. It's more than 0. It's 31,944. So now I know I'm using 35%, and I'm looking to multiply that. And I'm looking to multiply that by year 1 operating income. Operating income is row 17. Year 1 is column B. So B17. I'll enter and accept that. Now when I look at year 2, my operating income is less than 0. It's actually in the negative. So there, I can simply enter 0. Let's do another example. For year 3, I start my function with an equal sign. I'm looking at 35%, and I'm looking at 35% times the year 1 operating cost. Multiplication is the asterisk, and the year 1 operating cost, is here. What am I looking at? Operating income, I'm so sorry. The operating income is here in 17. So here I can accept that equation, and there we have it. Now I could use my fill handle and continue across. Now I'm looking at my operating income, and none of the others are below 0. None of the others are in the negative. So here I'm looking at my function at 35% times E17. That's the operating income. Now I'm moving along into the next step, which is BB. And on BB, we are looking at, CC, we're looking at year 1 net income. Year 1 net income. So I'm in row 19, column B. Year 1 net income, I'm looking at the year 1 operating income. So I start with my equal sign. Year 1 operating income is right here, row 17. And now I'm looking to take my year 1 operating income and subtract that from my year 1 income taxes. Subtract that from my year 1 income tax, which is B18. And now I'll go ahead and accept that. Again, just to reiterate that, we start our function with our equal sign, and here I am looking at finding my year 1 operating income, I want to subtract that by my year one income taxes. Accept that, and there's my data. One more. Start with my equal sign, and I am looking at my year one operating income. So my year one operating income is here now in D17. I want to subtract that from my year three income taxes. Accept that formula. And now you would continue that right along through all of the other columns. And you'll see that's updated. So now I'm looking at, for year five, I'm looking at F17 and subtracting F18. So we continue that through all of the columns, and now we can move on to the next step. So now we're on EE. On EE, we're looking to go to cell J4 and insert in a column spark line. What's a spark line? You would have discovered that from your reading, I know. It's essentially just a miniature chart that displays in a cell for us. So let's look at, we're going to insert in these spark lines. I'm going to begin by going to J4. So here's J4. Now you'll want to look on your Insert tab. Here's a little slight difference of my working on a Mac. Locate your Insert tab, and you're going to look for the Spark Lines group. Spark Lines. Now we need to select a data range. Well, in our directions, we need to select a cell range of B4 to I4. So my range will be B4 to I4, and then I can say OK. You'll see my miniature graph is displayed here. Looking at the next steps, we're going to do the same thing and insert in column spark lines in cells J5, 6, 8, and 15, and then in J19 and 17. So we're going to use the same ranges. So let's go through and quickly put those in. I need to go to J5, and I'm going to again insert in a spark line, and my range here for J5 will be, I'm looking at B5 to I5. My next range I need to go to is J6. Again, I'm going to insert in a spark line, and my range is B6 to I6. My next range is J8. On J8, I'll insert in my spark line, and my range here is then B8 to I8. Next, I'm looking at J15. So I will insert in spark line, and my range here is B15, I15. And I need to do J17. I think you have the idea now. And I have J19. So now I have all my miniature charts, or the spark line that is inserted in. Now, the very last steps of part 1 of the lab assignment will be for you to change the background that's shown in figure 384. That figure is back here on our page 1 of our lab assignment. You'll want to format in that olive green shade your title, subtitle, the expense only in column A, the total expenses only in column A, all of row 17, all of row 19, and our assumptions chart. So you'll need to take a moment and go ahead and format that. For example, I'll select row 7 for expenses, and then I will format my cells looking for that accent color there. And I think the other one was total expenses just in column I. And again, I'll go ahead and apply that same accent. And then I think I'm looking at operating income and net income. And I think you have the point here. So you want to make sure that you carefully follow the formatting. And again, it's just an easy way to visually represent the data that makes it easy to follow along, dissect the information, and read it cohesively. And then you'll do your title and subtitle rows up here. So that's the end of just part 1. But wait, don't go anywhere. There's part 2 of this assignment as well. Don't worry, it's the last part, and it's not that much to do. We're just quickly working with a chart. So why don't you try to see how far you can go in part 2 of the assignment. And as you go through part 2, you'll see all the steps are outlined. But when you get to instruction part 3, you do not have to do this part. Just part 2. It's just a couple quick steps.